a few seconds. Ngā mihi morena, everyone. Welcome to the Komiti Whakariti Mahiri, the Planning Committee of Auckland Council, the first meeting of this committee in the new term. And I want to acknowledge, firstly, the Deputy Chair, Councillor Josephine Bartley, who is together. We will lead this committee's work. And I want to acknowledge the re-elected Mayor of Auckland, Mayor Phil Goff, and the councillors that have been re-elected, and also the four councillors, the new councillors that have been elected, Councillor Angela Dalton, Councillor Tracy Mulholland. Councillor Pippa Coombe can't be here, she's doing her work in Wellington today, and of course Out West Councillor Shane Henderson. And also we have always the members of the Independent Māori Statutory Board on this committee, and there is a suggestion that they're not elected, but they are elected, and then they are selected and appointed. And want to acknowledge the appointment from the Independent Māori Statutory Board members Tau Henare and Leanne Namani. And great to have you both back. So we're going to be a rather busy committee over the next 3 years, and thank you for all the contributions that we've just had in our workshop members to build up our work program and our focus areas, and we'll see that come through in the new year. And I also want to acknowledge the staff that will be working with us, led by Chief of Strategy Megan Tyler, and I acknowledge the huge effort that they will be putting in over the next 3 years in our support in guiding Auckland's physical infrastructure and planning. Today we have our first committee agenda before us. At the beginning I need to take apologies as per normal, and I've received apologies from Councillor Coombe for absence on council business, Councillor Young for early departure on council business, Councillor Collins for absence, and we will move in second. Do I have a second, please? Councillor Simpson, thank you. Those apologies. Are there any declarations of interest under item 2? On any matter before us here today? There being none, we'll go to the confirmation of the previous meeting's minutes, but I think we did those last time at the end of the term. So there are no petitions under 4. We've had no requests for public input for this agenda, and then we go to local board input. And we've had a request from the Ōrākei Local Board, represented here today by member Troy Churton and Troy Elliott. You don't have to be called Troy to be elected at the Ōrākei Local Board, I don't think. There are some others.
You have to be bald. Helps to be
right.
bald.
You have to. It's a 00 top, okay? Let's get to the serious side. Members, there's been an approach from the Ōrākei Local Board represented by the 2 Troys on integrated residential developments in the single house zone in Ōrākei, but through a lens of wider Auckland as well. And so I welcome the members who will make a presentation to us here today. Now, I've had a discussion with our Head of Planning, John Duguid, had a late discussion with Councillor Simpson. As you well know, we can't treat with giving any sort of firm direction other than a consideration of this by referring it to staff to have a look at it, and that's what the recommendation was being. And I think Councillor Simpson, you're going to move it, and Councillor Henderson, thank you. We'll move and second that, and then we'll hear from in your presentation now. Troy Churton, you're going to lead it?
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, that's a great start anyway. Thank you for that. Look, I just want to start by reminding everybody, or maybe refreshing, I'm sure I don't need to remind you, refreshing that the unitary plan has effectively reallocated what is a finite, scarce resource, and that is land. And it's effectively reallocated residential land in a way to enable greater infill housing to meet a whole range of government-led objectives in a way that we've never seen before. And as part of the way that that land has been zoned to enable that infill, there has been a small pocket or pockets of land across the whole region which have been left as or changed into single house zoning. And single house zoning as a very minority zone in the scheme of the greater intent for the unitary plan has a very clear purpose statement to it. And some would argue that single house zoning is critical for retaining amenity value as much as other types of value in any area, whether it's in our area of Aoraki and on the slopes of the stereotyped blue chip Remuera, or whether it's on some areas of the Manukau, and there are some areas around Favona, Arthur Street, Onehunga. Region-wide, there is single house zoning pockets, and they're only small, and they're precious, and they're scarce, and they're deliberately left in the unitary plan because the unitary plan allows infill multi-unit development in a more permissive way across all the other zones. With that in mind, there is still, in my view, in our board's view, and in the views that we've had fed to us from people in Cockle Bay as a result of a recent planning decision, as well as the residents' associations in St Heliers and Remuera to date, a view that the integrated residential development prospect for a single house zone is completely contrary to the purpose of a single house zone. And I don't know if you've had the chance to see a memo that I circulated, but there's a statement in there that the definition of an integrated residential development generally, however it's applied, whatever zone, allows a developer to arrive roughshod effectively over the purposes of the zone. So in a single house zone, it's potentially possible for somebody to amalgamate 2,000 square metres of land where perhaps 4 single units would have been expected under that zone and apply for a 71 unit residential development. And that's a fairly massive distinction from what a zone actually says. And the case that I've included extracts from, in my view, is one of the most robust and strongest written decisions that you could possibly wish for. Because and I've included some extracts at the back of the short memo that the proposal, the IRD proposal, is contrary to the objectives of the plan. The single house zone is clearly not identified as a zone where intensification is generally expected, and so on. And so the thrust of appearing before you today is to ask you to take action and direct planning staff to use the tools available, which is a plan change, in order to make sure that any party, developer, whatever, who approaches a single house zone piece of land wanting to dramatically do something dramatically different from the purpose of the zone, be required to meet a higher standard than you might expect for a normal restricted or discretionary activity. And that we understand that to squeeze 71 units to where perhaps 4 were intended is so significantly different from what the plan expects that it should be treated as a non-complying activity and nothing else. So this is not about trying to deny somebody applying for greater infill in a single house zone, whether it's in Remuera or Otara. This is simply about making sure that the integrity of the unitary plan zoning is maintained, and the way to do that is to kick the IRD back as suitable for other zones, but to make sure that if it's going to be attempted in a SHZ, that it's a non-complying activity anytime. Look at that, it was musical.
Troy Elliott, anything to add?
Absolutely not. Sorry, can't even turn it on at the moment. That's cool. Absolutely not. No, I'm fine with what he said.
Thank you, Troy. Yes. Councillor Simpson, did you have a question on this?
Troy's actually answered my question. I suppose, I've read a bit of media around this, Troy, and it's come up as being a little bit NIMBYism in my backyard. So maybe just for clarification, can you just give, and I know you've touched on it, a little bit more context to the fact that this isn't just something that applies to Ōrākei, it actually applies across the region, and you have evidence that other areas are supporting you.
Yeah, so look at what I haven't brought the actual email trails of notes from people in the Cockle, whoever here represents the Cockle Bay, Howick area, people from you, so people from your area, Sharon, representatives from the St Heliers Resident Association and Remuera Resident Association as at the time that the board supported this submission. And the other residents' associations are not. It'll come. What is on record, though, which is kind of related to this, is that what your resolution, if it can be done with enough haste, is that the unitary plan tools available to manage this through the plan change and the use of the non-complying activity status. Because if you just step back and allow yourselves to be emotionally affected by something for a moment, say if you're in a single house zone in a street which has got single houses on 700 metre sites, and that's the fabric of the street, and then suddenly a 100 unit development on a couple of amalgamated sites is plonked in the middle of that. Apart from being really concerned about the impact of that on your single house zone street, you don't have any opportunity to have a say because the RMA has taken away the notification rights for residential developments of that nature. So the only tool left for us as governors, as decent planning people, is to require developers looking to create that effect in a zone which doesn't have that effect as a purpose to make them go through a non-complying activity status regime.
Thank you. Troy. Councillor Walker, please.
Thanks for fronting up, Troy. So I'm certainly familiar with the Cockle Bay issue. I've read all the material, the independent hearing commissioners and the like. And I'll just go to a couple of questions. First off, quite obviously, we've got the prospect of a plan change because this could happen anywhere. But the other issue I just want to address is that if I recall, the planner's report actually recommended that this development go ahead. Okay? So conceivably, we could have another approach from another developer anywhere in Auckland, and we might have another planner's report recommending that something go ahead. And the only check and balance we might have is a call, as happened in this instance, from the independent commissioners. So my question is, what do we have to do internally in terms of the advice that officers are receiving around these sorts of issues?
Yep. It's more a question for maybe our Chief of Strategy rather than Troy.
Well,
it was a question to the organisation. So can I just ask Chief of Strategy to respond to probably the submission here today and the direction that we're showing in the B identified in red.
Thank you. Great, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Troy. And look, it's helpful to get this feedback. And so this is not necessarily a new issue. And it's one that there's a number of these kinds of things where there's been some concern raised, whether it's from planners or communities. And we are looking at a package of these, and we do want to bring them back to this committee early next year. We'll be able to provide advice and actually do some analysis around that. There are some, technical planning issues that we will give advice around, discretionary versus non-complying, and and all of these things. So it's great. We agree it needs to be looked at. We would like to do that, but we'd like to bring you a more rounded view of a number of these kinds of things, and then talk you through those.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I understand what the officer is saying. I guess my concern is, as I said, any developer anywhere in Auckland could come at us right now, that is today, and would we experience the same situation? So I'm putting that question. What confidence do we have in terms of our guidance advice that we're giving to our planners or the like around this issue? Because it goes to single house zone, it goes to heritage, it goes to a whole range of issues that are threatened at this point.
Through the chair, it is always a case-by-case assessment, so sometimes there might be heritage.
We've got a problem because of precedent. So
Thank you. Look, it's more of a comment, and I appreciate that, and it is the motion is moved and seconded, so you're free to comment. And look, we hear your points.
Yeah.
And we will progress this work. We will do it with other work to isolate it. It's a big task to cherry pick one item at the moment, Troy. So we need to investigate this. We will do that very early in the new year. And we will honour the resolution to become the B once it's passed. And look, I'll take some other questions. I've got Member Hanare, Councillor Newman, Councillor Cashmore, Councillor Stewart and Councillor Watson.
Oh,
Kia ora. So what you want is what the West has already got? Or the South has already got? Or how does that work? Or is it what you're wanting is a change just for that area?
no,
worldwide?
no.
Calm down. I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, thanks to Councillor Toh.
I wish.
What, eh?
I'm not a councillor. I haven't raised the level yet. Maybe next time.
Let's get back on.
Now that Henderson's
We'll
out
go
there.
back on course.
No, this is, yeah, I mean, obviously, Troy and I represent Ōrākei, but this is something that we're putting out as regional, this is a regional issue, and it's got nothing to do with socioeconomics, perceived blue chip, white chip, brown chip, whatever, it's nothing to do with it. This is about the integrity of a zone for a piece of land, wherever the land is. And unfortunately, because of the definitions and the ability to have these things called integrated residential developments, you will get some planners who say, oh, that's one, and some who say that's not. And we all know in this room, the resource management game is one where money and experts can make a good case on just about anything if you allow it to. So the best and simplest tool is to ensure that an integrated residential development for a single house zone, where the purpose of that zone is so clear that any layperson can understand it, means that if somebody wants to come ahead and, like I said, put a 71 unit development in that zone, they have to do so and get the thing assessed as a non-complying activity.
Cool.
Simple.
Thank you.
It's a simple solution and it retains the integrity of the plan.
Councillor Newman, please.
I'm not sure. So my question for you is, I too share concerns about the integrated residential developments classification. I want to deal with that. But I also have concern about the application of the single house zone. I can defend a single house zone to defend an urban ngāhere, a coastal area, an area subject to inundation, and I can make the exception for Cockle Bay given that it is so poorly served by public transport. I couldn't make any argument to defend a single house zone in Ōrākei beyond those things. So how about we address the integrated residential development classification, particularly in areas mixed housing, suburban and greater, and the quid pro quo being that we actually remove the single house zone for areas that where we're not defending the urban ngāhere, where we're not in the coastal area, where we're not subject to inundation. In other words, why don't we upzone in Ōrākei and do away with the integrated residential development classification? That way we've basically offset everything. Would that be to your satisfaction?
It's, I'm always grateful for your challenging questions, Councillor Daniel. I think you just got to come back to the fact that the way that the entire land resource of our region was allocated and zoned reflected an allocation based on wall armies of advice to enable infill housing to meet objectives. And single house zones, wherever they're situated, whether they're in my ward or any other ward which isn't suffering inundation and the things you mentioned, reflect other values than just the need for intensification.
But your local board area is very market attractive and a very good destination for investment for the purpose of intensification. So beyond defending the coastline, beyond defending the urban ngāhere and the fact that there is quite a lot of public transport investment in some of the corridors adjacent, isn't it a good place to have some of this development, notwithstanding the problems with the integrated residential development classification, which I can see are becoming a problem in terms of the way in which a developer applies?
Well, you know, I could say that, you know, the Arthur Street area in Onehunga is, you know, close to a motorway, close to an airport and suitable for the same sort of thing. Again, this is an issue bigger than Ōrākei. Did you? Yeah. I think where you appear to me to be taking this issue is into a greater refresh of all zoning, rather, you know, which is not in my view, Daniel, that the issue here. The issue here is about why do we have single house zoning, and if we do, which we do, how do we uphold the integrity of it? There isn't much of it.
Thank you. I think that's answered. Thank you. Councillor Stewart, please.
Thank you. I just wondered, were you aware that the development at Sandsford Road, the council's consenting officers had sent information out to the Howick Local Board to request whether they wanted it to be publicly notified or limited notification, and unfortunately it appears that the email hadn't been opened, and so the reporting officer decided that it would be limited notification. And in such an area where, for those of you that know Howick and Pakuranga and especially the Cockle Bay area, that's an area where we have a history of flooding and stormwater and inundation, and it's also just across the road, as you're probably aware, to two schools. That to have these 71 apartments put upon us when it had only been limited notification and should have been public notified. Were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't aware of the background communications. I know that no, the short answer, no.
No.
But I don't, you know, it is what it is, and we've got a good decision anyway.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Watson.
I was just going to speak very briefly to the recommendation.
Thank you. Look, I'll close the questions there because I think we need to progress this. Councillor Watson.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. And I'll just be very quick. And I think it's been a pretty compelling presentation today. I thank Troy for that. And I would say that these, what I would regard as perverse results, do go across the region. I can think of a number in my ward, and I think they do need to be addressed sooner rather than later. And I think, you know, hopefully that timing up there does that, along with that wider package of other issues that might be before us. And just, you know, and I don't know if that's the appropriate place or not, Mr. Chair, but I certainly from my perspective, sitting through the unitary plan, you know, one of the notions was certainly intensification, but was also affordability. And what I see in some of these more desirable areas is that sure, intensification, and in this case, this single house, so huge intensification takes place, but there is no contribution to affordability. It's just a whole lot more units, perhaps marginally less than the big single house or that was on there. So that notion that there is some sort of benefit to the community just doesn't exist. And in fact, quite the reverse, the amenity of some of these areas that we might not live in, but actually part of an attraction of Auckland. So I don't live in Aoraki or Paratai Drive, but it's actually quite pleasant to go through there. And, you know, I've done that all my life, as I know other Aucklanders do too. So while there's that, while there might be that, you know, that kind of sense of, well, you know, it's the not my backyard type, I don't go along with that. And what I would like to see in that analysis too is that important component of affordability. That was, you know, one of the drivers for part of this intensification as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson, did you need to say anything as a mover?
I'm happy. I've moved it. I'm very happy with what the Deputy said.
Thank you. Closing it out, Councillor Walker, please.
Just want to speak to this further to my question. So I have a particular concern around B, and that is around the timing. So we're talking about present preliminary findings. So I'll repeat that. Present preliminary findings at a planning committee workshop in the first half of 2020. I'll repeat that, the first half of 2020. So what I want to speak to is, this is a substantial issue. The areas of single house residential in Auckland are not small. They are across many areas of Auckland. We have development forces lined up where you have developers actively purchasing multiple single house residential properties, and they're looking at what council is doing. So we need to action this now. It's relatively simple. I would have thought that the officers would have been on to this already, and that we could have something brought to us quickly. Otherwise, we could be defending multiple planning cases in court, and this could be costing us a very, very, very substantial amount of money. And in addition to that, we will have huge numbers of people in Auckland in single house residential areas very, very concerned that they could have a massive development going up next door to them, blocking out their view, impacting on their amenity, impacting on their heritage, impacting on inundation, stormwater issues, and those issues are prevalent here in Howick at the site. So we need to be doing something here. So there's the immediate issue around a plan change, and there's the immediate issue around some form of an internal advice note to planning officers, because it's the advice given by planning officers and their report that effectively got us into this situation. So this is it. I would address this issue then to the mover and seconder. Are the mover and seconder happy with this delay? That is the first half of 2020, and that this is just going to be preliminary findings. So is it going to be a year or so, or a couple of years before we deal with this? So I'm just
Okay, thank
addressing
you.
that issue
Look,
to the mover and
if I
seconder.
can come in there, please, because we need to move this along. We've actually been on the item for half an hour. It's an important item, and I'm sensing that Troy are appreciative of the B that's in front of us and the direction. Yes, we don't do instant planning here, I'm sorry, gentlemen. We've got to do the investigations first.
Look,
I'll put an
Otherwise,
amendment, Mr. Chair.
we could end up
yeah, I'll leave
in
it to you
a
guys.
precarious situation.
You could.
So look, I think the question to the mover and seconder, I don't think it needs to be answered because the mover and the seconder have backed the B. That is the answer.
You could make the word preliminary final.
It could be in the first month.
And we will look at this, as it says, in the first half, and we come back in February. So I'm going to put
I'd
this...
like to move an amendment, Mr. Chair.
No, you've spoken. You need to do that at the outset. You know the standing orders. If
Perhaps someone else might move an amendment.
I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Can you just say there's no extraordinary business?
And we don't have any extraordinary business, so we will proceed to item 8, and that's a report from Simon Randall. That's on the resource management system reform that we're all aware of. I think this is rather procedural, but Simon, brief intro, please.
Tēnā koe te himana, tēnā koutou ngā mema o te committee, ko Simon Randall tōku ingoa. So I'm Simon Randall, I'm from the Strategic Advice Unit, and we're leading Council's submission on the Resource Management System Reform Issues and Options paper. This is a comprehensive review, and as you say quite rightly, Mr. Chair, this is a procedural report just to set up a working party. The reason for that is the submission is due on the 3rd of February, and we're going to need some guidance and direction as officers over that December-January period. Just at a high level, this is comprehensive reform of the resource management system. It does ask big questions. It goes beyond the Resource Management Act and takes into account other pieces of legislation such as climate change, the Local Government Act and the Land Transport Management Act in terms of where it overlaps. After the issues and options paper, the current independent panel that government's appointed to carry out this work will report back to the Minister for the Environment on the 31st of May. The Minister will then consider that and further consult, probably from July onwards. And then we'll have an opportunity to have a further submission at that point when we see what the preferred option is. And then legislation is likely next term if the current government is returned, and we'll have a third opportunity to submit directly on the legislation at that time. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Simon. So time is of the essence here, as per usual. Do you want to move, Councillor Newman? Okay. Okay. So just, you're happy to move it? I've got a move in Councillor Newman and an interest in being part of it as well. Now, the other thing here is there's crossovers between planning and regulatory, and I think it's appropriate that Councillor Cooper is there, or the Chair of Regulatory, which is Councillor Cooper, to be there. And I've got an expression of interest from Councillor Newman. Are there any questions of Simon at this stage? Nothing? Now, appoint a political working group, Chair and Deputy, Chair of Regulatory, 3 local board members, 1 independent Māori statutory board member. The independent Māori statutory board will sort that one. Now, if we have a question for either Simon or Chief of Strategy, if we add another councillor there, are we required to make that 4 local board members? Because I know the local board members have a keen interest in this. Can I just clarify that?
Sure. Look, there's not a requirement, but it would be consistent with the way in which the council's operated over the last number of years. So it would be the right thing to do. Yep.
Okay, look, I'm happy to include Councillor Newman and up to 4 local board members. Is that, Simon, can I just check that with you? Would that be appropriate wording? Up to 4? Councillor Newman, you happy with that? Good. Okay, no further questions? Everybody happy with that direction? Councillor Hills, to have a second, please? Councillor Bartley. That's okay, that's okay. Second to Councillor Bartley. Sorry, I had another question. Councillor Hills, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy with the process, but this also did happen in the environment and climate change community last week around the local boards, and I think maybe just offline we can have a bit of just an idea of how it's going to work. Obviously, it's quite easy to go around this table and get views or by email, but how do we ensure all 21 boards are view, that it's not the individual members' view of, it's quite a mammoth task to represent 149 people by 3 people. It's a little bit easier with 4 people representing 21. So I just want to know, going forward, how is this going to work? And maybe if we have a bit of a feedback after 6 months of if it's actually improving the decision making or if there's some better way we can do this. Because I know how hard it is to get working groups together when it's just councillors IMSB sometimes. So I just want to make sure that we're not making it harder for staff and elongating the process for everyone. Thanks.
Look, I think that's a really good point, and not just about local board members' contributions, but it's actually about the councillors' contribution as well. It's got to be in the interests of the council. And of course, you bring your own point of view as well, but it's got to be in the interests of the council. That would apply to the local board members as well as the councillors. Member Namani.
Kia ora, this isn't a question really, if it's okay, it's more of a statement. Just want to acknowledge the good work that Council's undertaking with the IMSB to work consistently across all levels of the submission development. So we're engaged at that level and just wanted to acknowledge that we're represented on the working group, steering group, and we are attending meetings with the Māori Outcomes Lead around that. I just wanted to make a comment that it's not quite correct that this report doesn't not directly impact on Māori. This RMA reform, it becomes important, I think, that we know what the issues and aspirations are for Māori when preparing our policy and submission development. The IMSB itself has provided its own input into the issues and options paper, and we'll continue to do that too. We'll also confirm some of our thinking, I think in the next workshop that I understand we have on this matter. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you. I will put that to the vote then. All that's moved by Councillor Newman, seconded by Councillor Bartley, A, B and C. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Now we go to another approval required to make a submission on the Kāinga Ora bill. This is the second bill. And welcome Anna Jennings and Penny Perry. And we have the motion before us. I've had an expression of interest. I've only had one expression of interest, and I've taken it and put it in writing there for us so we can move it along. Thank you, Councillor Angela Dalton, who's got an interest in this. So very willing to add to that. And we really don't have time for the local boards to go back and select members. It's going to have to be done through the chairs meeting, which I think is next week. It's coming up. So we need to land this quite quickly. Anna, would you like to make a brief presentation?
Sure. Kia ora. So the Kāinga Ora Homes and Communities Bill, the second bill, we're anticipating this comes out this week. There was a release from Minister Twyford yesterday, but we can't see it on the order for Parliament today. So we don't know the details of the bill yet, and in that we don't know the timeframes yet for the submission process. What we do know is that the second bill will introduce the powers for Kāinga Ora that will enable them to develop in specified development areas. So the powers will range from consenting powers to also around funding. It's a very important and significant bill for Council, and it has potential to impact across Council group policy, planning, finance, and operational areas. We have established a working group, and we're anticipating to have our first meeting next week, which includes representation from IMSB on that working group. But we can't really say a lot more until we see the details of the bill, and if the timeframes allow us, we will have workshops with local boards and with this committee and with IMSB as well. But this is in preparation for if those timeframes don't allow, then we will need a political working group established.
Thank you, Anna. Questions on this, members? Reasonably straightforward. Councillor Newman.
So we're anticipating that this bill will address the issue of how a government policy statement can, in effect, overlap or usurp the objectives and policies of the unitary plan, the RPS provisions.
So the government policy statement, no, is not to do that. The government policy statement will be a statement from the Minister of Housing on what is expected to be addressed by Kāinga Ora and their activities, and that's not due for 2 years. What this bill will do is provide Kāinga Ora with the powers to start a process where they identify a specified development area, so a spatially defined area, and then indicate that they will need certain powers in order for them to develop that area. And as Anna has said, those powers could be consenting, planning powers to override the unitary plan, it could be rate setting, they could require infrastructure to be built both inside that specified development area or outside, and that's why it has some significance for local government.
And who would presumably with the consenting powers that they would take, they're going to fund the infrastructure as well as the transmission infrastructure to give effect?
So previous submissions by Auckland Council on the concept of urban development agency has indicated that we would expect if they were going to build or acquire new infrastructure that they fund it. But because we have not yet seen the bill, we don't know if that matter's covered, and that will be one of the things that we will be looking at really carefully, and if not clearly indicated, put that in any submission going forward.
Thank you. No further questions. I will put the A and the B. Look, can I have a mover? I better have a mover first. Mover and Councillor Tracy Mulholland. A seconder, please. Councillor Simpson. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Miss Perrott, where are you going? Miss Perrott, this is your final meeting. Penny's final meeting, folks. Penny is leaving the organisation. She's been here the whole life of the new Auckland Council and beyond at Auckland City. Penny, just really want to acknowledge your phenomenal contribution over a really long period. I've always found you have a wicked intellect. You've made a major contribution to some really important strategic documents that are guiding the city now. They'll be guiding the city for decades to come. Even yesterday, just a brief exchange that you and I had, I'm thinking to myself after that meeting, wow, that is such an important oversight of critical work that you have just reminded me of. And The list goes on. I mean, your application is phenomenal. It is one that has an eye for the smallest detail, the perverse outcomes that need to be avoided, the great outcomes that need to be created and delivered. Big innings you've had here at the council before and the last 9 and a bit years. If I went through the list of your contributions, we would be here until well past lunch. But seriously, Penny, it's been phenomenal. On behalf of us all and Aucklanders, I am expressing a very warm gratitude for your contribution to shaping Auckland. Thank you.
It's been an honour. It's been a real privilege and honour, so thank you very much for those kind words.
Now, item 10, and we will call, is it Michelle?
Oh no, it's going to be Warren
It's-
McLennan.
Oh, sorry, Warren McLennan, and this is quite straightforward too. This, we just need to re-establish the working parties there. Warren, welcome Warren. I don't think we need to go over this. We've read it, we understand it, and the motions are before us. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Henderson, Councillor Casey. Is there anything, oh, I need to ask the question, is there anything further to add? It is. Thank you. All those in favour, sorry, member nominee.
It is pretty straightforward, but one of the comments I just wanted to make, actually in relation to that resolution, I've been on the previous area plan board. One disjunct I see, and it may well be that it ought to be managed when you move into the plan change for the Hauraki Gulf Islands. That might be where it's sitting, but launching, I guess, the conversation of the existing plan, got no problems with that. The existing communities plan, no problems with that. But don't think that that enables a full picture of mana whenua views. It doesn't. So all I'm saying is, whether it's in the local area board, and acknowledge that consultation will be ongoing, engagement will be ongoing, there's just a disjunct there in terms of how the rationale from going from that community plan to that does not cater for mana whenua worldview. And let's hope engagement will fill that gap, and then I guess the next step will fill that gap. And I just wanted to highlight an example of that. The plan changes for a number of islands, not just Waiheke. But the focus, of course, in this first stage tends to be Waiheke, because that's where the residents and communities are, and that's where the core resource management issues are. But don't forget, there are other islands that sit within the Waiheke local area that are potentially having a number of transformations happen to them going forward with treaty settlements, existing treaty settlements, harbour settlements, etc. So I just wanted to say that. I'm not seeking any notes, but it was just my observation in the previous phase of this exercise.
Thank you, Member Nominee. And Warren, I think going forward we need to take those views on board and address those as we progress the work. Thank you. It's moved by Councillor Cooper and seconded by Councillor Casey. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Now we go to item 11, making the Waiata Shore local centre private plan change operative. That was a private plan change, yes. And Sanjay Banks. Welcome, Sanjay. Now, we've read the report. I think this is reasonably straightforward too, as well, Sanjay.
Just a procedural request to make Plan Change 24 Waiata Shores Local Centre operative. So this is a private plan change from Woolworths to rezone some 1.9 hectares of land from residential to business. It's been through the normal statutory processes in terms of being accepted by council for processing, notification, submissions, hearing, and the appeal period on this plan change has been exhausted. As such, the plan change can now be made operative with the approval of the committee.
Thank you, Sanjay. Any questions here, members? Member Namani.
Kia ora, just one question. There's just a reference in the Māori impact statement to most of the issues that were raised were relevant to the detailed design rather than, and I didn't have access to anything to kind of give me a sense of what they were. Like, I'm just interested.
Sure. So I think one of the major issues was the impacts of the development on the adjacent Papakura stream. So that was really something that could be assessed at the resource consent stage rather than through this plan change process.
Thank you. Either Councillor Dalton or Newman, would you like to move and second this? Yes? Councillor Dalton and Councillor Newman moved and seconded. I'll put that to the vote then. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. And now we go to another call for making plan changes 14, 15, 16 operative. Todd Elder, you've been overseeing this for us, Todd?
Yes, I've been a part of the team, but there's a couple of planners overseeing it. Yeah, in brief, it's a recommendation to approve plan change 14 and 16 and adopt plan change 15. They all address technical matters that were identified by plan users and council staff. Is essentially just to refine and make the plan more efficient as intended. We are approving plan change 14 and 16 under section 17 of the RMA as they relate to parts of the plan that the local authority can approve, but plan change 15 relate to the regional coastal plan, and the plan must adopt the plan to refer to the Minister of Conservation, as the regional coastal plan is the provisions that that apply in the coastal marine area. So that's in the summary, and happy to answer any questions.
Questions, members? Member Namadi?
I feel like a broken record, Mr. Chair. One simple question. In the part of while we were developing it, we consulted with mana whenua, etc. internally. Did we talk to the Tupuna Maunga Authority before it became notified too?
Yes, we did. We sent them an early copy and attended a hui to present the
Thank you.
changes.
Thank you, Todd. Would somebody like to move, please? Councillor Mulholland, and a second, please. I'll second then. So it's moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, Todd. Moving 12, I'll move, 13. Procedural. Deputy Mayor second. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. 14, there's nothing under consideration of extraordinary that's been raised with me prior to the meeting, and therefore concludes the meeting. Thank you, everybody. I close the meeting of the Planning Committee.